everybody. Rita Karp, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, I was delighted to hear from you this morning, last night. I'm not sure when you sent it. And Rita has a new great-grandson.
Mazel
Ooh,
tov. Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
So that's one highlight. I always think of a newborn as the best reflection of optimism, because people have decided it pays to bring in a new person into this world. And what could be more optimistic than that? And you should enjoy all your kids for many years. And
Thank you
I
very
know
much.
Louise Singer doesn't show her face either, but she is a part of this class.
Oh my
And
goodness.
a highlight of my week was Louise calling a few days ago to see how we were. And I hope you won't mind, Louise, but I saw a side or heard a side of Louise that I'm not familiar with. She on the phone waxed poetic because she described how fortunately she lives in a house, so she can sit outside on her porch and she watches the children play on the small street on which she lives. She listens to the birds chirping and looks at, not often, but when she can, the blue skies. And that was just so beautiful. So to Louise and Rita, may you continue with those good feelings. May we all.
Amen.
So,
No sé cuáles son los códigos postales de Londres.
do I have to speak that language?
No.
Okay, so
¿Cuál?
you stay on mute unless, for the newcomers, you have something you want to share with us, and I encourage. But whoever that is, please go on mute.
De Londres.
So, in sharing with you news from this part of the world, I thought that I was only going to share one of the inventions research projects, because I thought everything else that's on the news is too depressing or too controversial. But I will talk to you about something, and at the end as well. But the first thing I was going to mention, Israeli scientists at Ben Gurion University. We don't often talk of that university, but they have taught goldfish to navigate, you know about this?
Yeah, it was in
A
the paper.
watery tank on wheels. Now, do you know why they've done that?
Waiting to hear.
Well, I thought that if you knew, so to learn whether a species can perform tasks outside its own environment. Now that struck me particularly because I think we all like that opportunity to see if we can survive in another environment at this time. But another item on the news is material for a movie. Apparently, an Iranian in Tehran for a few years has had a plan. And what he has done, because of Facebook, he has been able to discover Olim from Iran. And what he has done is start communicating with them, claiming that he is a Jew, and he finds that he can speak with them in Parsi, Persian, and he has convinced some of them that he is legitimate. He has told them that he can't leave Iran, but he really wishes he could because he longs to be in Israel. And he has managed to convince at least 6 people, I think they're all women, that he is Jewish and that over the last 3 years, he has built up a relationship so that he knows that one of them has, for instance, a son who's being inducted into Tzahal, into the army. And so he finds out information that he is hoping will lead him, et cetera, to enable spying. Now, 5 women, Israeli women, who are these Olot, have been arrested, not arrested. They've been charged with helping him. So each of them has a lawyer, and they're trying to prove that they're innocent. But one of the reporters said, joining the campaign that's been very lively this week about Corona and getting the vaccination, that there should be a campaign about this as well, because everyone should know that this is going on. Crazy, crazy and frightening. Yeah? Okay.
Actually, talking about advanced Israel, I got an article from Israel saying that they just discovered a new Band-Aid, a surgical Band-Aid that is applied to the patient before the surgery and then just put together after. And that Band-Aid supplies the antibiotics, also can identify any other disease that the body might have.
Wow. Thank you, Esther. Yeah. It's these bits of news that keep us going. So, hero or role model? What does Elliott Rabin, the author that we're discussing in this series, what does he mean when he says the biblical hero? Now, should I call on you? Are you prepared?
Absolutely.
Okay, Riva, go ahead. You wanted to say something as we ended. I have a lot to say about it, but I'm sure you worked all week. So go ahead.
Well, I had to deal with COVID first. I'm now over it. And
Okay.
Yes. So this is what the notes I jotted down. The difference between a hero and a role model. A role model. A role model is someone you want to be or to be like. Someone who serves as an example of the qualities we would want and would want our children and grandchildren to emulate. For example, teacher, religious leader, doctor, nurse, community leader, police, fire, EMS, etc. People whose everyday actions toward people can be looked upon with respect and pride, and who represent an example of morality, ethics, compassion, loyalty, and commitment in serving their fellow man or woman or child or pet. Role models are examples of what we can all aspire to be. Hero. A hero can be morally flawed, yet can also perform feats above and beyond the average person's capability. It might be a military officer, a construction worker, a neighbor, a homeless person, a child who surprises everyone when, with little regard to their own safety, performs a daring act of bravery to save another from harm. It's not always just physical harm. Sometimes it can be lending support for another lost or confused human, someone who seemed in that moment of crisis incapable of saving him or herself. Sometimes, though, the hero and role model images merge when one steps onto the threshold and stumbles into the other's role. For example, an unwitting hero who happens upon and saves a drowning child might then have been changed by the experience, decides to devote him or herself to training or teaching swimming for those who might be underprivileged and not have access to such a facility. A role model, let's say a teacher, praised and awarded repeatedly over the years for setting so many kids on the right path, finds something unexpected happens when he or she saves a child from drowning and thereby becomes a deliriously joyous one-time hero. I think it's important to entertain the slight differences because it seems to me that heroism is ignited at the moment of crisis And we really don't know until we're facing it whether we can meet that challenge. But in my heart, I believe that we can all, with dedicated effort and compassion for others, aspire to being role models.
Very nice.
Beautiful. Right on. Right on. It's been nice seeing you. Have a good week. But what you've captured, Riva, is what we'll see by the end of this evening, exactly what Elliott and Rabin believes, that we aren't necessarily looking to be that one-time hero, but in fact, what he is going to suggest that being a role model, because we are human, and I think you used the word flawed, that being a role model is being heroic because of our flaws and us trying to go beyond our flaws. And we'll see that in a moment. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen as we go into our discussion of Moses, but for purposes of echoing perhaps what Riva's just explained and introducing to those who were not with us last week, I would like us to look at two very different poems. Now, while reading, if you still, please keep this in your mind, if you still had the responsibility of nurturing a child toward a valuable life, which of these two poems would you share? Last week, we talked about stories. You shared some stories that you thought really influenced you. So now I want you to choose, for our purposes of further understanding the difference between hero and role model, which of these would you share with the child, whatever age that child is? So we might be familiar with Robert Frost stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. What is Frost creating here? What image? And someone is on a journey. He's returning perhaps home, it sounds like. And there are some metaphors here. What do you take from this?
I think the last 4 lines actually say it all.
Go ahead.
Because no matter how much we have done and how much we achieved, there is so much more we have to do.
Okay, very good. Esther? Yes? Because now I only see a few. Anybody else? So we have a metaphor. The journey represents life, yes, that we're going through life, trying to achieve. And what does he mean when he says, my little horse might think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near? What is the individual on the horse trying to do? There seems to be a conflict. What he'd really like to do is the snow-filled, you might not agree with this because you're facing snow, but it's meant to represent pleasure and indulgences. And so the horse isn't used to the individual taking the time to notice these pleasurable things. And so he's probably wondering, what am I doing just observing? But in the end, the individual decides, I have responsibilities and I must go on. So that's the first poem. Now, the second one is written by a Bengali poet, philosopher, musician, Rabindranath Tagore, who happened to win the Nobel Literature Prize in 1913. Yeah. Mother, let us imagine we are traveling and passing through a strange and dangerous country. You are riding in a palanquin, and I am trotting by you on a red horse. It is evening, and the sun goes down. The waste of Jordigi lies wan and gray before us. The land is desolate and barren. You are frightened and thinking, I know not where we have come to. I say to you, mother, do not be afraid. The meadow is prickly with spiky grass, and through it runs a narrow, broken path. There are no cattle to be seen in the wide field. They have gone to their village stalls. It grows dark and dim on the land and sky, and we cannot tell where we are going. Suddenly you call me and ask me in a whisper, what light is that near the bank? Just then there bursts out a fearful yell, and figures come running toward us. You sit crouched in your palanquin and repeat the names of the gods in prayer. The bearers, shaking in terror, hide themselves in the thorny bush. I shout to you, don't be afraid, mother, I am here, with long sticks in their hands, and hair all wild about their heads. They come nearer and nearer. I shout, have a care, you villains. One step more and you are dead men. They give another terrible yell and rush forward. You clutch my hand and say, dear boy, for heaven's sake, keep away from them. I say, mother, just you watch me. Then I spur my horse for a wild gallop, and my sword and buckler clash against each other. The fight becomes so fearful, mother, that it would give you a cold shudder could you see it from your palanquin. Many of them fly, and a great number are cut to pieces. I know you are thinking, sitting all by yourself, that your boy must be dead by this time. But I come to you all stained with blood and say, mother, the fight is over now. You come out and kiss me, pressing me to your heart, and you say to yourself, I don't know what I should do if I hadn't my boy to escort me. 1,000 useless things happen day after day. And why couldn't such a thing come true by chance? It would be like a story in a book. My brother would say, is it possible? I always thought he was so delicate. Our village people would all say in amazement, was it not lucky that the boy was with his mother? Like many children, what is this boy doing here? What's going on in his imagination?
He's protecting his mother.
He's fantasizing about an opportunity to protect his mother. Now,
It can also be a boy who is looking for his mother's approval.
okay, his mother's approval. It sounds like he's looking for his brother's approval. I don't know necessarily if it's approval or their respect. And all of the village will see him as somebody who is, has grit, valor. Now, there's no doubt that his love for his mother motivates him.
Yeah.
Now, what really turns him into a hero? The poet says, when he's willing to self-sacrifice. Now, how is this different from the first? And again, I'm going to ask you, which one of these, if you're looking to nurture someone toward a worthy, valuable life, which character would you want to share with them?
The first one.
Okay, please explain why.
Because he's clearly a person who has a sense of responsibility, a sense of purpose, a sense of mission that isn't unattainable, that is realistic and noble.
Okay, and I think you also used the word, Riva, before, every day, that it's something maybe mundane, but it's ordinary, and it's what keeps life really going.
Yep.
Not just these adventures that this child is fantasizing about. Thank you. Anybody else?
I also
You're amazing. Thank you there.
Okay,
Thank you.
just make
brother.
sure you're. The second one, Bracha,
Marlene,
if I read it, when I read the second one, it is as if it came out of an action comic or
Yes.
or a Marvel movie. And I'm not sure that it would be the kind of poem that you would want to read to most children. The first one, I agree with Riva. I would read the second one, because I think the second one puts the everyday chores that we have to do into almost a tranquil state. Like, we're not confused. It's just something we're moving forward quietly and slowly. And also, I think that the first one gives the child a great sense of the world around them.
okay, thank you.
I think in the second poem, the child is an insecure person who dreams of what he might have done. Well, it is a much more positive picture of the child in the first one.
Okay, I think so. And I think also in the second one that I feel like it's a chaval, it's a pity that the child only thinks he can show devotion to his mother by physically being a warrior, and that he should realize that it's through the mundane and giving in other ways. Okay. I believe that Elliott Rabin would choose Frost as well. While Rabin would admire the son's devotion to another, which is what he's going to claim, the kind of hero that he admires is somebody who is thinking of another, not just for his own self-glory. So he would admire the son's devotion to his mother, but the essence of being heroic for Rabin is not the bravery, albeit there are times, but rather heroic for him is confronting internal conflicts and displaying internal strength. Now, sometimes it's something as simple as the man on the horse deciding, can I take time to play or must I get back to work? So the hero and the role model are not synonymous terms. For Rabin,
So the location address.
being a positive role model
Oh,
is heroic. Why?
hang on. Okay.
We are flawed, all of us. We are all fallible, which means we can make poor, selfish choices and be only concerned with me. So when we act selflessly, we have overcome our human frailties. And that's who he thinks is the biblical hero. Now, we're going to turn to Rabin's analysis of Moses. And I want to begin in the way that he does in comparing Moshe to Sargon. I don't know if you know Sargon, but he was the great Mesopotamian king who reigned from 2333 to 2279 BCE. Now, again, as we read this text from Akkadian literature, I want you to then compare it with the verses, the psukim that we'll be reading about Moses's birth. I am Sargon, the great king, king of Akkad. My mother, and pay attention to details, try as much as you can. My mother, the high priestess, conceived me. She bore me in secret. She placed me in a reed basket. She sealed my hatch with pitch. She left me to the river, whence I could not come up. The river carried me off. It brought me to aqui jar of water. Aqui.
I know exactly what she's talking about.
Please mute yourself.
There's in the Book of Kings or something. But pretty obscure.
Please. And aqui drawer of water brought me up as he dipped his bucket. Aqui drawer of water raised me as his adopted son. I became lord over and ruled the black-headed folk. I hard mountains with picks of copper. I was wont to ascend high mountains. I was wont to cross over low mountains. So what's your first impression of Sargon? Are there details there that said, wow, this sounds familiar?
Yes.
In what
By
way?
Moses.
What specific details should remind you of Moshe's story?
Well, she was conceived and bore him in secret. She placed him in,
Okay. And then what does she do with him?
she put him in a reed basket.
It puts them in a
Puts him in a
reed
reed
basket.
Okay, and with that pitch, and then the next similarity?
The river carried him off, and then
Okay.
he's saved by acting.
Okay, now, and then he is.
Becomes a
re-
king.
Yes, now I expected you to know those details even before we actually read the psukim from Shmot. Okay, now, I'm going to want you to pay even more attention to the differences. Because what Rabin does here, he is comparing or contrasting Moshe, a biblical hero, with the classical hero of that time.
I think there is
Okay.
a big difference. Number
There
one,
is going to be a difference,
sure,
many.
humility to start with.
Okay, so hold on. Absolutely, but let's first read. a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw him that he was good, she hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she took him a reed basket, smeared it with clay and pitch, placed the child into it, and put it into the marsh at the Nile's edge. His sister stood from afar to know what would be done to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe to the Nile, and her maidens were walking along the Nile, and she saw the basket in the midst of the marsh, and she sent her maidservant, and she took it. She opened it, and she saw him, the child, and behold, he was a weeping lad, and she had compassion on him, and she said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews." His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women so that she shall nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew up, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became like her son. She named him Moses, and she said, "For I drew him from the water." So we see similarities. What are differences? So why did you say a moment ago humility? How do you see that here?
Because in the very first sentence, it says, "I'm king of." So he's bragging, kind of.
Okay,
Moses,
very good.
Moses, on the other hand, who was a very modest person, found all kind of excuses not to. And then he's also a role model as far as I'm concerned, because in spite of his inability of speech, he became a leader.
Okay, thank you. Now, a very important point, what you said in the kind of narrative Sargon text is, and the one that's here. First of all, it's in first person. Yes, that is called a boast narrative. Whereas in the Moshe text, it's in third person, and more than that, it's not just Moshe who has the spotlight. It's talking about Pharaoh's daughter. It mentions Moshe's mother, Yocheved. It mentions Miriam, his sister. That's very, very significant. Also, I should have really put in one pasuk before the beginning of Moshe, because you don't know why, in the case of Sargon, why his mother is hiding him. Now, why is that significant? We know when we read the whole chapter that Yocheved is hiding her son because of the decrees of Pharaoh. Now, are those decrees just intended for Moses? No. Who are they intended for? Every single son of the Hebrews. Now, why is that significant? Moshe is just one of the people. That's going to be a very important point, that usually we don't see an exclusive spotlight on Moshe. Now, Sargon is saved by a lowly water carrier, after which he's got to work his way up to the throne. And the story emphasizes him attaining, again, despite obstacles, his own glory. Moshe starts out as one of the Hebrews who are slaves, and he's rescued by a royal character. He's raised in Pharaoh's court. So what is Moshe's heroism? We're going to see as we continue looking. Verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Now it came to pass in those days that Moshe grew up and went out to his brothers and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. He turned this way and that way, and he saw that there was no man, so he struck the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He went out on the second day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were quarreling. And he said to the wicked one, "Why are you going to strike your friend?" And he retorted, "Who made you a man, a prince, and a judge over us? Do you plan to slay me as you have slain the Egyptian?" Moses became frightened and said, "Indeed, the matter has become known." Now, what is, in contrast to Sargon, Moshe grew up in the court, and what does he do? And Rabin says this is his heroic move. He rejects the comforts of the court and of royal power and identifies with the Israelites. Number 1. Now, when it says that he looks this way and that way, and then he smites, what's the significance of that, of him looking? There are different interpretations. Go ahead.
Well, I think the fact that he says that there is no man around, then he'll become a man.
Okay, so that is, im ein ish, if there is no person, you become the ish, the person. Another way of looking at it, and I usually like to do that, is he might be looking a little nervous that somebody's going to see him do this. Well, Rabin claims a classical hero would never think twice. He would just take his sword and topple the guy's head. But that wasn't Moshe. Rabin also says the following, in line with what we said about a role model. Moses has enduring heroic qualities, sympathizes. He takes prompt, decisive action, fearless ability to act in ways no one else would. And that's not just in when you're going to hit somebody, but sometimes you have to be fearless even when it's just a matter of bringing something up, talking about something. He's acting for others. Now, why is that particularly important? What do we see here that never would have happened with a classical hero or a classical king? He does something and one of the Hebrews undermines him. What does the Hebrews say to him? Who are you? You're a prince over us? You're going to judge us? And that doesn't bother him. His ego, it's not touched. It's not touched. Now, let's look at the next episode. What do I mean by a new well story? We know that in Sefer Breshit, in Genesis, we encounter a few episodes of our patriarchs, our matriarchs at wells. Mm-hmm. And the descriptions are very verbose. Let's see what happens here. Pharaoh heard of this incident and he sought to slay Moses. So Moses fled from before Pharaoh. He stayed in the land of Midian and he sat down by a well. Now, the chief of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. But the shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses arose and rescued them and watered their flocks. In the chapters in Genesis, these kinds of scenes could have 20, 25 verses about the scene at the well. What do we have here? Very few. And not only that, how many lines are there about the Savior, Moshe? Somebody read to us again. What does it say about Moshe's involvement? One line. Moses arose and rescued them and watered their flocks. We're beginning, Rabin points out, to see a pattern of the Tanakh not wanting to put an exclusive spotlight on Moses, despite what he is ultimately going to be doing for this people. Okay, now, the snap. Moses was pasturing the flocks of Jethro, his father-in-law, the chief of Midian, and he led the flocks after the free pasture land, and he came to the mountain of God, to Horeb. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within the thorn bush, and behold, the thorn bush was burning with fire, but the thorn bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, "Let me turn now and see this great spectacle. Why does a thorn bush not burn up?" By the way, some commentators have commented that just the fact that Moshe took the time, like the guy in Frost's poem, to notice something said a lot about him. The Lord saw that he had turned to see, and that's the significance of that. And God called to him from within the thorn bush, and he said, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Hineni, here I am." And he said, "Do not draw near here. Take your shoes off your feet, because the place upon which you stand is holy soil." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look toward God. Now, what happens next? I purposely didn't put it there. What would you imagine, if you don't know, but I'm sure you all do, how does Moshe react to this mission, this appearance that God is about to give him? What's his reaction?
He's reluctant. He doesn't want to do the mission.
And what's the reason for, yes, his reluctance?
He doesn't feel confident. He sort of feels he's just, a simple shepherd who doesn't have the skills or the ability to confront.
Absolutely.
I also find it interesting that he had to take his shoes off, because when you're barefoot, you feel the pain of the stones. And so Moses' sensitivity to the pain of the people.
Nice. Nice. There are a few nice interpretations of Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. Take your shoes off. Raglecha, we also know, comes from the root hergel, something that you're accustomed to doing. And so that Moshe now is being asked to do something that he's not used to. Yefeh. So imagine a Sargon being reluctant to lead a people on a mission. No, no. Okay, we know that ultimately he takes on the mission. He's constantly conflicted, and we know that there are times that he loses it, as we all would, dealing with that group of people. He is not patient. He is not as empathetic as his brother Aaron is. And these are flaws. These are flaws, but he has other qualities. So one could say, before we go on, what if a child reading this says, but Moshe wasn't patient. There were times that he really got angry with the people. So what I would do is point out, first of all, that's life. We know, and a child would know that also, that we can be worthy people, but there are going to be times, because we are human and we have emotions and reactions, that we are going to react, not in the best of ways. Now, of course, we wouldn't forgive somebody for doing something that is entirely inappropriate. But that is the beauty of this. And if we say that a biblical hero is relatable, it means that we can aspire to be like a Moshe, who is only a human being. We'll get back to that.
But the Torah is full of imperfect heroes.
There is no perfect hero in the Bible, no one. And people have to realize that. And Rabin discusses that there's a problem with some people not embracing the complexity of narratives and the fact that characters that we highly respect are flawed. But that's the nature of being human. So now, let's see how things develop. Very interesting. They've performed the plagues, and now they are at the Reed Sea, Yam Suf. And keep in mind that during the Makot, that rod was something that Aaron started off with. We had talked about that in another context. And that was almost comparable to the magic that Pharaoh's assistants were performing. So that rod symbolized that to Moshe, who actually had a lot of faith in his brother and in that rod. Okay, background. So now they're at the Reed Sea. The Lord said to Moshe, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them travel. There's a time for talk, but it's not now. And you should raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and split it. And the children of Israel shall come in the midst of the sea on dry land." And Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord led the sea with a strong east wind all night. And he made the sea into the dry land, and the waters split. Can you tell me something you notice if you compare verses 15 and 16 to 21? Take a moment to reread it, what God says to Moshe and what Moshe actually does. Read it to yourselves. What do you notice? Marlene, do you have a question? Flicht? Oh, because your hand is up in the picture. I don't know why. Okay. Anybody?
Moses attributes it to God brought the strong wind.
We're not there yet, Linda. What is the difference in what God says to Moshe and what Moshe actually does? You know already that we read very, very closely the actual text. What does God say in 16?
You should raise your staff and stretch out your hand.
Okay, and what in fact does Moshe do in 21? Chaf Aleph?
He
Stretches
just
out his
stretches.
hand, not the staff.
Yes, Michael. He just stretches out his hand over the sea. Now, Moshe apparently took God's command as a choice. God, in telling him to take the staff and the hand, was displaying an awareness of Moshe. Even at this point, after all that's happened, he still does not rely on his own power. So God has covered all bases. In case Moshe doesn't come through, the sea will still be split. But Moshe is ready to reject the rod at this point. And so he does only stretch out his hand. He is now confident, but he is only confident as far as being what? He's not this all-powerful, but he is God's.
He's
Messenger.
God's emissary.
Yes. Okay, now let's read what Rabin says about this. This verse describes Moshe at the peak of his strength. They've already left Mitzrayim. And simultaneously at the limits of his strength. Moses holds out his arm, yet God drives back the sea. It's God who does that. What then precisely is Moses' arm doing? The Torah gives us three explanations for the splitting of the sea: human, divine, and natural, that east wind. What are the relations between the three? All three appear necessary to carry out the miracle. Moses' arm signifies his and his people's faith in the saving power of God.
Yeah.
Moses' extended arm expresses his leap of faith. Now, this is what I think is incredible. From God's perspective, then, Moses' arm is a sign that God has a human partner. Without someone to receive the miracle, to recognize the miracle, and give thanks for it, the splitting of the sea would be nothing more than a tree falling in the forest.
I find it interesting. Sorry, I find it interesting when you say the partner, because we see throughout the Makot, or even in a Brit Milah, God could have done it without our help, but God wants us to participate in each one of them. And that's
absolutely. As we proceed in the Tanakh, we see that this is God's plan, not just for Moshe, but for all of us to be his partner till today. In the way that we can. And it goes on to say, Rabin says, God needs Moses to demonstrate and proclaim God's power. Without Moses, God is alone. That's mind-boggling. Moses has finally become the human agent God was hoping to have found at the burning bush. Now, what do I mean here? Image of biblical ambivalence. we know that as they continue on their way, Bnei Israel, the Israelites, that they are attacked for no reason by Amalek.
Mhm.
Rabin sees in the Amalek narrative the Bible's profound ambivalence concerning heroes. Let's read the psukim and you'll understand. So Moses said to Joshua, his helper at this point, pick men for us. By the way, look at that he doesn't say to Joshua, Bechar li, choose for me, but he says, choose for us. He is such that he's willing to make somebody else feel that he's really part of what's going on, Joshua. And go out and fight against Amalek. Moshe's already old. He doesn't have the strength, physical strength to do that anymore. Tomorrow, I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses had told him to fight against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. It came to pass that when Moshe would raise his hand, Israel would prevail. I always see that like a coach, coaching on his team. And when he would lay down his hand, Amalek would prevail. Now, Moses' hands were heavy. So they took a stone and placed it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur supported his hands, even that. One from this side and one from that side. So he was with his hands in faith until sunset. Now, why is this so significant to Rabin? How do we see Moshe being described in this episode?
He seems to have a lot of partners with him. He's not doing it all by himself.
He is not doing it on his own. He doesn't have the power, the strength.
But he's smart enough to delegate.
I'm sorry, he's
Smart enough to delegate.
I'm not sure what you mean. It's not enough to delegate.
Smart enough to delegate.
Oh, yes. Okay, now, but what's important is the Torah in describing it this way is presenting a hero in a way that you would never see in the classical hero texts. That they're allowing somebody who's considered heroic to see him in this very human, weak state. He's depicted as weak, but in the final tally, Moses makes the difference. For without Moses, Rabin says, without his intimacy with God that empowers him to call on God's assistance, the Hebrews, Rabin says, would have been off the stage of history long before they reached Canaan. Let's understand this. You have this character who has a right, certainly mentally, to feel so powerful in what he's achieved, but never does it go to his head. And the Torah is confirming that a hero isn't necessarily a physical, but not just that, it is constantly clear and brought home to us that he is only an agent. But there are ways to relate to God, and we need a Moshe to be almost our Shaliach Tzibor, to raise our voices to God. That's what we need Moshe for. Now,
Bracha,
go ahead.
the ability of Moshe to share the role of leader.
Yes.
We learned that earlier in the story of Yitro, where
Yes.
he set up the sort of the process for the way that he would govern over the people, using others to support him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to touch on that now. As they are approaching Sinai, being given the gift of the Torah, what does God say to Moshe? And the Lord said to Moshe, go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments. And they shall be prepared for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai. In another situation, God would have been portrayed as giving this mighty gift to the king on his own. But this democratic phenomenon is key. We have always had that it's for all of us. We need our leaders, and there are people that are going to stand out, but it's for all of us that all of this is given. And there's one final text that we might be surprised at. You know, in Sefer Dvarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moshe gives a long farewell speech. Now, what would you imagine a leader who has been with a group of people for 40 years, what would you say to them if you were a nice guy or if you were Sargon? I don't know him personally. He might have been nice. He just had a big ego. What do you imagine a leader would say in farewell to a people? If it's a biblical leader as opposed to the classical. No right or wrongs here.
The classical
Anyone?
leader would probably outline all his great accomplishments, victories, and battles. Everything is on me, me, me.
Absolutely.
Whereas with Moshe, everything is on you, your future. I'm not going to be here anymore. So let's say, here's what I need to tell you because I'm worried about you and I want you to continue to be close with God and do what God commanded.
Yeah, right on, Michael. Yeah. And in fact, this is part of what he actually says to them. And the Lord heard the sound of your words, and he became angry and swore, saying, if any of these men of this evil generation sees the good land which I swore to give your forefathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he will see it, and I will give him the land he trod upon, and to his children, because he has completely followed the Lord. The Lord was also angry with me because of you, saying, neither will you go there. Can you imagine, as Michael just said? He does not list his accomplishments, but because he cares, you can picture someone on their deathbed, because you care, you say things. You know, you might say, well, I'm not going to remind them of sins that they committed, because he does that in another way in Sefer Dvarim also, because I want them to be fond of me, have fond, warm memories. But no, Moshe is not thinking of himself. And I feel the need as I say that, that also doesn't mean that he didn't have his flaws. But everything he does here, he does for the people and for God, for sure.
I also think that it's very important that he reminds us, if we don't remember our past, we have no future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I'd like to return to the beginning of Moshe and his birth. Notice, a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. Now, there's something not very royal about that. It doesn't even say the name of the family. It says from the house of Levi, but it doesn't say that it was Amram and it was Yocheved, but it just says a man went. Now, we know that in biblical Hebrew, when it says Vayikach and he married, well, the translation here is married, Vayikach, when he takes. So we're a little confused. We know that Moshe has an older brother and sister. So what does it mean here? There's a midrash that says that when Amram and Yocheved heard the decree of Pharaoh, they decided they should separate so that they don't have another child. And Miriam comes and says, no, you for sure will make Pharaoh's decree concretize if you do that. And so this pasuk indicates that they come back together. And look what Rabin says, how this symbolizes something so very significant. Moses' chief relationship is not with the parents. When he leaves the court, he looks at the brothers. He doesn't go looking for his family, okay? And we know he has an issue with his family, by the way. Maybe that's a flaw. Okay. His chief relationship is not with his parents, but with his people. At Moses' birth, his father is simply called Ish, a man. His specific identity is of no importance, unlike Sargon, where we hear from what family he comes from and all the others. What matters is that he is a Hebrew. The Bible replaces the familial setting of the typical hero's actions with the national dimension of Israelite history. In classic hero stories, the national dimension is suppressed entirely or subordinated to the glory of the king. The Bible's account of Moses conveys exactly the opposite values. Moses is described as the most humble man. His extreme reluctance to assume leadership directly challenges the mythological narrative of what constitutes a heroic ideal. For Moses, what matters are the people and God's mission for them. He is merely God's agent and in his own eyes, thoroughly replaceable. We read this book in the context of a period, I think, more than ever, it seems to me, that we are so disappointed. I don't think we're even surprised anymore when day after day we read in the news, hear on the news stories about people that we would like to trust, who are in charge of our lives, whether it's politicians, and that's everywhere, in your home, in my home, and or whether it's entertainers you hear about, or whether it's rabbis you hear about, and that's in North America, and that's here, accused of horrific harassments, and psychologists and gynecologists all over. We're put in a position of people even think that our health is in the hands of people that are doing things for political reasons. That is, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, very frightening. But that is why Rabin says there's an ambivalence. People tend to need heroes, but the problem is when we idolize them and don't appreciate, nobody is to be idolized. Nobody. As we said last week, we need these kinds of figures to inspire, not the people I just mentioned, even though sometimes they do as well. But it's a very, very difficult situation. Would anybody like to confirm that or disagree? Disagree and prove me wrong. But it's not scary. Now, we also know that there are some people that we would like to see be in a position of authority, but they won't because they fear becoming corrupt. Because it is an easy thing, because all of us are fallible. Somebody wanted to say something?
Yeah,
I wanted to say that that when you idealize too much, then it can turn to idolatry.
Absolutely, Nechama. Absolutely.
I also think that you have to be careful. I told my daughters that you have to learn in spite of your teachers, not because of them. Because from some of them you're going to learn, but you also have to assert yourself. Don't assume that because somebody is in authority, they deserve to be in that position.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know not everyone is like me. Okay. No, I mean, we had a terrible case in Toronto many years ago of a teacher at Chat who students loved. And he also officiated as a chazan at a shul downtown near your store, Norm. What's that shul? Shari Shemayim. And years after, we were told that Israel, because he came back to Israel, he was a shaliach, that he was being investigated. And people had to come forward we know. It's very frightening because you are looking at people that they seem, this is somebody we want to be inspired by, and we are. And then we find this out.
Bracha, you read a lot about the woke, W-O-K culture that we're in right now, and equated to that, the cancel culture, where you can cancel somebody's whole career, his whole life over a supposed flaw, possibly something that was serious or not so serious, but there's no second chance. And in some articles I've read, they've drawn a direct correlation to the lack of spirituality in society. They're talking about the number of churches in any one city that have closed, synagogues that are sitting empty. And there seems to be a lot of talk by a lot of people about interconnectivity of these things. What's your opinion?
No, I want you to be clear. So why are people not going to churches and synagogues?
Well, it's not why, but the result of them not being involved in anything else but their daily pursuits of becoming a charismatic leader or making lots of money or whatever, is the fact that there isn't any other thing that they're actually thinking about except that. And as one time, so spirituality, and it's coming from people who I don't consider to be religious, who are saying these things.
Yeah, well, that's why it hurts that much more when it is spiritual figures.
That's true.
Are accused of these things. But I will always say that you can't decide that religion doesn't have something to offer just because these people are distorting it.
Yeah, yes. But as we grow up, our models and the professions that we pick are very often influenced by people we know, not necessarily religious people.
Well,
We try to emulate people that we admire.
absolutely, yeah. But I think what Stan is saying, that more has to be done. I'm not sure how to revitalize or redirect people who have strayed from wanting more in their life. Now, there are people that will say that they are spiritual. They're just not joining big synagogues, but that's another issue.
It depends who they're worshiping.
Hold on,
Hi,
Stephen.
it's Emil.
Okay, so
Emil,
you
Hi,
asked a
Bracha.
question.
how are you, Emil?
Baruch Hashem, fine.
See, there's a guy who's spiritual, Baruch Hashem. Okay, go on.
I have to mention the contemporary hero of our time is a guy related to Debbie Solomon by the name of Natan Sharansky. I think he is a genuine hero who went into politics, saw that, well, whatever, before going into politics, he was a hero. But when he did go into politics and he saw how corrupting it could be, he left politics. He is, I think, the hero of our time and should be acknowledged as such.
We mentioned
Here, Emil. Here.
That was Debbie.
I'm with you, Emil. Absolutely.
Well, I want to tell you this sincerely. I mean, I've said it to Morty many times, and I think of him when I remember reading what he said to the Russian court before he was sentenced.
Yes.
Here he was standing in front of them, and I can't recall the words he said, but I can recall my reaction to reading them. It led me to tears. And he spent 9 years in solitary confinement. And when he got out of jail and they told him, go straight across that bridge, he did not go straight. He went from side to side to show them the finger. So he is, and then when he went into politics, he could have stayed in politics, but he chose to leave it. That is the true hero of our time.
Thank you for saying this, Emil, because I want to make it very clear that, God forbid, I'm saying that there aren't people, but that's the point, that they leave or they won't get involved because of what is likely to happen or that they're going to be surrounded with.
Yes.
Yeah. Stephen.
So, yes, I'm on. So we're discussing what is the true hero as a role model. Of course, we're setting up Moshe and Abraham in others of that vein, but in modern times, we know it's definitely not someone like a Desmond Tutu. In fact, any person who's a thinker that would even put up as that person or people of that nature as any kind of hero is not clearly thinking. Sharansky is right at the top of the list. Maybe Martin Luther King in many ways, and others. And we don't have that many. And all of these, whatever in that category, of course, Rabbi Jonathan Lord Sachs, absolutely, and probably Menachem Schneerson, Mendel Stierson. So there are quite a few we could put in that category. But these individuals, their distinctiveness is that they are above the criticism of those who criticize in a negative way to demean them. They stand out at a level that does not affect them because of the nature of their character. And in other words, character assassination, as we see nowadays, does not affect them. That is something that they are above.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? Riva. I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a hard lesson for us to learn or to even consider. But there's this old cliche, and as a writer, I hate cliches unless I create my own. But one man's meat is another man's poison. And one of the things that we do today because of social media is believe too much of what we see and do not do the research that we should do in order to find out if it's really true before we pass it on. And one of the things Stephen mentioned, Tutu, there's a part of me that is just reviled at the thought of his position on Israel and the Jewish people. However, to those people that he did benefit, he is a hero. This is what happens though. One side will demonize the other side because it doesn't please our requirements, our needs. It doesn't satisfy our needs and requirements. And then the other will do the same with someone that we think of as a hero or someone that benefits us. And we have become so divisive in our society now. We have become so anti everything from food to religion to politics to anything. There is always, you say something and someone else will immediately counter it with you're hateful, you're awful, you're terrible, you're wrong. So it's so hard to find right and wrong, truly, purely right and wrong anymore. So some of us just sort of hide inside or crumble, and some, the loudest and sometimes the most, I will say with quotes, evil, are the people that are speaking out the loudest. And until we can start to come to terms with what is the truth and how do we face the truth, even when it hurts, even when it's someone like Tutu, who I have such resentment for in one respect, but on the other hand, he did do some good for some people. And so we need to figure out as we move along and move into the future, we have to figure out how we can stop dividing us and not accept, but understand that one man's meat is another man's poison.
Yeah, but
I think that is, for the most part, true. I think what we're concerned with, what we look for, is that we want to make sure that each of these leaders are genuine and are in it for the right reason. That's what bothers me most, because I feel sometimes I'm naive, that with leaders, I say, I can't believe, because this was somebody who has devoted his or her life to. So why would they do that? Just for glory?
My problem is that in public relation is a very, very important and strong thing in our life. Israel, as much as I admire Israel, being an Israeli myself, I think when it comes to public relation, they get a 0 for me.
Well, that's a whole other discussion.
No, the same, it's a way we look at things. We are influenced by the media. Whether we want it or not, we are all influenced.
Okay, but what Riva's suggesting is, first of all, you can't always believe the media. You've got to be careful with that, especially outside of Israel, because of the way things are reported. And I fully admit that there are things here that are not great, but you don't leave a child just because they do something wrong. You work with that child, especially if you love so much as we do. Public relations. Let me end with this. So I told you I was feeling, I open the news, I listen to the news, and I see things, and it's distressing. But our fellow student, Bev Birkin, sent me about an hour before class a video. I'm not sure why he sent it today, but it's one of those videos that talks about you can count on Israel, and it shows that it goes where there's an earthquake, and it's where you need to send doctors, even if they're your enemies. And it made me think that forget about the leaders. We have a people that is right on. It's been great being with you, and to the new people joining us, I hope we'll see you again. Thank you for your participation. Please stay well, and don't forget, even though it's snowing there, that Sunday night is Tu B'Shvat, planting, the time of renewal.
Thank
No
you.
matter what.
Thank you, Bracha.
Okay.
Thank you, Bracha.
Yasher
Well,
Koach.
Thanks,
Yasher
Bracha.
Koach.
Be
Have a
well.
good week.
Have a good
Be
week,
well.
everyone.
Give us,
Bye.
Well done.
give us a great food for thought.
Thank you.
Yes, Yasher Koach.
Yeah.
Love it.
Ruchim to you. Okay, take care.
Take care. And happy Tu B'Shvat.
You too. We can actually plant here.
Or maybe we can have a Tu B'Shvat Seder online.
That's-
I remember as a child in Israel, Tu B'Shvat was a wonderful holiday because the school buses picked us up from school and brought us to the train station. And the whole train was full of school children. And there was a loudspeaker in every car. And the first car started singing, and we all sang till we came to our destination. And every 2 students planted 1 tree.
They don't even do what we used to do, is that we get these stamps from Karen Kayemet, and we had to fill up a page with trees. Do you remember that?
No.
I don't know. I do.
Yeah,
I guess I'm
I
older
do,
than you.
yeah.
Okay.
They
All
may
right. Take care.